Good morning and welcome to the Expanded Woman Network podcast hosted by Sherry Gideons and Misty Willis.
Good morning and welcome, Marissa. Just wanted to give you a little bit of information to our guest today. We just want to welcome you. We have you here talking about how your conflict can lead to deeper connections. And we're just so happy to have you here to help expand the women in our lives as well. And welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me here.
Welcome. We're very excited to have you and very excited to cover this topic. Misty, do you want to start with any questions with Marissa?
I think let's stop because I want you to ask her the question. I don't want to ask the stupid Mars question. I didn't like that one last
So, really what I'm curious about is, of course, I have 4 children and a husband, obviously. And where does conflict start in the family? Is it historical? Is it really pulled forward from generation to generation? And that behavior is a way that we model, and then conflict really originates from all that?
It certainly does originate from our past. There's no question about that. Unresolved issues from our past often lead to conflict, sometimes consciously, and many times it's unconscious. So what happens is, because all of us, whether we acknowledge or believe that we grew up with dysfunctional families, most of us suffered some form of dysfunction or some pain and suffering throughout our childhood or our early adult years. And what happens is, if we kind of bury some of the pain that we experienced and we never really deal with it, it starts to come back when we're in relationships. So we get triggered in relationships. I mean, when you think about what happens during a conflict, we get upset or we get disappointed or we feel hurt. And where does that all come from? Most often it's based on our expectations, which are based on our past. So there's definitely a link there for sure.
Yeah, it's funny too, because I was just having this conversation recently with a guy I met by the name of Bob Donnell, and he says that a lot of triggers are as the result of unmet expectations.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And then when you look at where did the expectations come from, many times, again, it's based on unhealed wounds. So we might have certain expectations because they weren't met when we were children, and now we're trying to have them met as an adult through our significant others, through other family members, through our children. And when they're not, then we go back to feeling some of the same pain that we felt as a child. So when we're able to move through that pain, not deny it, but actually allow it to surface and heal from it, then we are able to look at our own needs and wants from a different perspective, not from a place of expecting people to meet any of them, but to start to handle them on our own and not have those expectations. It's always nice when people give to us, for sure. Yeah. But if we can let go of the expectation or have them feel obligated to give to us, then it's a much freer and authentic relationship.
I think it takes the pressure off too of all parties, because if you don't have that expectation of like, so-and-so is I want them to do this for me, and then they don't, and then you're like resentful for no reason, and you're like, you shouldn't be surprised that even happened. Like I've had that several times in my life, and then I'm like, well, why do I have these expectations in the first place? So that's a great point.
Yeah, many times when our expectations are not met, another thing that creates and adds to the conflict is the meaning that we attach to that expectation not being met. So, our expectations are either something we want somebody to say or not say, or do or not do. And so when something happens, we attach a meaning to it. We make it mean things like, oh, they don't really love me. If they loved me, they wouldn't have done X, Y, or Z. Or if they really loved me, they would have noticed I needed help and I shouldn't have had to ask. And all this stuff goes on, right? And so the meaning that we attach to things is also something that I really focus on when I work with my clients, because when we look at, and again, the meanings we attach to everything goes back to our childhood. It goes back to our core wounds, right? For me, for example, one of my core wounds was feeling stupid. Because I, grew up in a family where, I was told when I didn't do things right, but was not really praised or encouraged when I did well. So I grew up thinking I was stupid. So then fast forward, into my adult years, if my spouse said something where I felt he thinks I'm stupid, I would be triggered and react from that place of, you think I'm stupid. Well, no, he didn't. But that was my interpretation because I still have that wound to heal.
That's funny that you say that, because I can so relate to that, because my core wound is perfectionism. I mean, my father was an overachiever and very successful, but I came up during an era where, parents didn't really give love the way that I wanted. I wanted that ooey gooey huggy love and, you've done well and all of that. But a lot of it for me originated when my parents divorced. And, my father went on and lived another life and married somebody else and, put a lot of attention on her children.
Right.
And so I created all of these not good enoughs, not worthies, not deservings. And so to try and get his attention and his love, I would overachieve.
Right. And that happens to many people. And so you're not necessarily living from your authentic self. You're living from a place of neediness and wanting something from him that you didn't get as a child. And the stories, like you said, we create stories based on our past experiences of not good enough, being unworthy, not being smart enough. In my case, I had the perfectionism too, for the same reasons, right? So, but when we can heal from that, then we can recognize that the fact that your father didn't give you the attention and love really had nothing to do with you at all. It wasn't because you weren't good enough. It was about himself and where he was at in his life and whatever was going on for him. But it feels like it's about you, or everything feels like it's about us. But that's another one of my famous lines is, it's never about us. We just make it about us.
I know, every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. So do
Sure.
you work specifically in taking people back to their childhood, or even starting with children and, really helping them to resolve what may be, what they may be going through in their lives at whatever age they are?
Well, I actually used to work with children, so it's interesting that you brought that up. My past career was a school teacher. I started out as a preschool teacher, and then I taught elementary school. And then I actually started and ran my own holistic elementary school because I was disenchanted with the public system and just felt too many kids were falling through the cracks. But that's a whole other story. But because of that past experience, I obviously dealt with a lot of conflict with children, among children, parents, teachers, all kinds of stuff. So I really, and that was a big thing that I was helping my students with, both when I was in the public system and in my own school, was really looking at how can we learn to connect with one another from a loving place without reacting and putting people down and judging them and all that kind of stuff. So did have a lot of experience with children, but now I do work with adults. But we do go back. I have a 3-month program that I put together that really does go through first uncovering core wounds, because they need to be uncovered before you can heal them. And many times we've buried them so deep that they've become unconscious. And so I have processes that I take my clients through, either privately or through a group program, where they can start looking at what they might have buried. And it's done in a very safe and supportive way, because it can be a scary thing to do by yourself. So once they've uncovered the wounds, we then go through a number of different processes for healing them and for letting go, and forgiveness processes and all of that wonderful stuff. And then the final part of the journey is creating the boundaries, which is what they really want to be able to do. But until they've done the first 2 steps, it's just really tough. You can start creating boundaries in simple ways and in easier situations. But what happens is, if we haven't healed from our wounds first, once you try to stand up for yourself, especially with your family, as soon as somebody challenges you or starts saying you're selfish or judges you because you're finally taking a stand, if you haven't healed, you're just going to fall right back into your old patterns that don't serve you.
Sure. Miss, do you want to ask any questions, Marissa?
Yeah, I do. I noticed on your sheet that you have, it talks about 3 steps to transform your conflict into healing.
Right.
How can those steps help us, and what are they?
Well, the first step is to take 100% responsibility for all your feelings, because many times, and that's a tough one, people don't like that step, but it really is the first step, because as long as we play the blame game and we keep pointing the finger to someone else and saying, well, it's their fault, either a past, wound, it's my parents' fault because they didn't love me enough, or they didn't give me what I needed, and that's why I'm struggling, or now it's my husband's fault or my kid's fault or whatever. As long as we've got our attention on somebody else, then there's no power. You can't stand in your power because you're playing the victim role, right? So you're giving your power away. So taking responsibility, it's not about taking fault. It's not about switching the blame from somebody else to yourself. Like I keep telling everyone that will listen to me, just forget about blame altogether. Like, let's just drop the blame game, because it doesn't serve anyone. So if you forget about blaming and you just say, yeah, I'm responsible for how I feel. It's up to me to look inside and see what's going on so I can heal from it. So you need to really take that responsibility first and recognize that, you're the one that has to do the healing work. So the first step is to take responsibility for all your feelings. And then once you're willing to do that with compassion, without, beating yourself up, just I'm responsible. Okay, now what? Right?
That's the hardest part.
It is the hardest part, but
Right?
but it's easier if you let go of blaming yourself or making yourself wrong for feeling what you feel. It's about loving yourself through the process and recognizing that whatever you feel is okay. It's justified. There's nothing wrong with how you feel. So you don't have to blame yourself or anybody else for them. Just own them. Just say, okay, I feel, insecure, or I feel like I don't have confidence, or I don't feel worthy, or I'm feeling angry or disappointed or whatever, right?
Right.
So take responsibility for any of the triggers that you experience in your relationships. And then you have the power to now do something about it. So when you get triggered and you feel angry or disappointed or hurt, the next step, now that you've taken responsibility for it, is to look a little bit deeper and find out what's really going on for you. What core wound did it activate? Did it activate the I'm not good enough? Did it activate I'm stupid? Right? What am I making that situation mean? Why am I feeling so upset? I'm feeling upset because I'm feeling like the person thinks X, Y, or Z, which even if they do, that's their stuff, right? But we're taking it on because we haven't healed it. So first you take responsibility, then you uncover what the wounds are, and then you heal them. Because once you heal them, you can be in relationships with people and you'll start to recognize when you've been triggered, because healing is in layers, right? It's not like you don't just heal and you're good for the rest of your life. I mean, I've been working on myself for over 40 years and I still get triggered. But the difference is when I get triggered now, I don't get plugged in as much into the drama of the conflict like I used to. It's not as intense as in the past when I would, really get angry. I start to catch myself sooner so I can stop it and say, wait a minute, what's going on? What did that just activate inside me? And then you can start making requests, which can be in the form of boundary statements from the person that you've just been triggered by. So for example, let's say you've been triggered because somebody said something that you felt made you feel unworthy. You can let them know. You can say, wow, this is something I've done, like with my husband. If I feel, like he said something that made me feel stupid or whatever. I've done a lot of work on that, so it doesn't come up as much, but it used to come up a lot. So, once I became aware of it and I took responsibility for it and I noticed I was triggered, I would then step back and say, wow. And then I'd say to him, you know what just came up for me? What you just said or what you just did brought up this feeling. So in other words, he didn't give me that feeling. It was already in me. But what he did or said activated something and brought it to the surface. So now I have a choice. I can take responsibility for it and heal it, or I can lash out and react to him. And that's where conflict, I believe, can bring you closer together and create deeper and more meaningful relationships. Because when you take responsibility and you own how you're feeling and you recognize what's really going on, then I can say to my husband, when you do X, Y, and Z, this is a feeling that comes up for me. Would you be willing to do, something, this other thing? So I can make a request, because his intention isn't to hurt me. He doesn't know. For him, it's not because he thinks I'm stupid. So I can teach him, as we can teach others, how we want to be in relationship with them. So we can ask for what we want and create agreements with each other and give the other person or the other people, the other family members in our lives, the same opportunity, to be able to say to them, if I ever, trigger you or upset you or disappoint you, let me know. But let's talk about it from our hearts, not lashing out at each other, right? Because nobody feels good when that's happening.
And I think when you do that, everyone else wants to close off, and they're not willing to hear why it's affecting you the way it is, because all they hear is la la la, yelling or whatever it is. So it makes it a lot harder to come through, but you have to do it out of a place of love. So
exactly. And when you're doing your own healing work, another beautiful part of it that also helps to bring you closer together is when you recognize someone else triggered. You're gonna start to recognize, wow, they've been triggered, even if they're lashing out at you. And then you won't take it as personally because you realize it's not about you. And you can turn it around. Instead of reacting with upset, where you just start, going back and forth like this, you can just say, wow, I'm really sorry if what I just said upset you. That was not my intention at all. What's coming up for you? And you can actually create an opportunity for them to look deeper and to heal what's going on. It's an incredible process but you have to do it yourself to become aware of all of this, and then you start to see it everywhere.
Wow, that's so amazing that you said that, because I've been working on myself for 30 years. I kind of woke up to all this in 1997 as a result of a near-death experience.
Wow.
And it was that experience in which I went to the other side, and I was basically really shown the things you're talking about right now in obviously a variety of different ways, because we're our own creators. And, it's interesting what you've been saying, because one of the things I've developed, and Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about this, he says we use 95% of our subconscious mind. We're living in the past all day today.
Yes.
And we're putting out over 40,000 bits of information. And like you said, emotions and feelings that are tied to the past.
Absolutely.
And, for myself, really, I've developed this keenly over the last 6 years about living in the moment.
Yes.
And, just like what you said, the value in being mindful of taking ownership of my feelings.
Yes.
And being willing to observe them from a place of non-attachment.
And compassion.
It's so interesting, so many of the steps that you're sharing. Oh my God, I love them, because it's making me even more mindful of, when they're showing up, to step back and look at them and say, wait a minute here, I can either give you power.
Yes.
Or I can be willing to look at them, observe them from a place of love, and respond in a different way. But one of the things I like to do is I always say the quality of questions you ask yourself determines the quality of life you live. And so when I have those feelings show up, because a lot of it too for me was I wanted to be liked, and I wanted to be liked so bad that it was almost like when I was out in public when I was a little girl, I always wanted to be famous. And and I tried to do all these things to stand out.
Yes.
Because I wanted so badly to be liked. And then when I was in an environment, I would say to myself, oh, you know what, they don't like me, or there's something wrong with me, or why am I not getting enough attention?
Right. Because you're looking for it all outside of yourself instead of giving it to yourself. Because when we give that to ourselves, we don't need it from anybody else. It's still nice to receive it. It still feels wonderful to receive it, but we no longer need it in order to feel happy or fulfilled. And that's true freedom.
That is freedom. That's what I've experienced over the last few years. And honestly, it was partly because of Sherry that I was able to do that. And, she really helped me to really just accept me for who I was, and don't give power to the other people that are, trying to bring me down, I guess, kind of thing. Right. So,
right. And when you think about it, if people are trying to bring you down, where's that coming from? Me. Right. It's not because it's not because of you. It's because of them. They're trying to bring you down so they can feel better. Right. Anyone who doesn't treat you well, there's stuff going on with them. That's why it's not about you. That's what I keep telling my clients. I know it always sounds like it's about you because the person's directing it at you and saying it's you. But they can say whatever they want and do whatever they want. But underneath it all, if someone is not treating you with the love and the respect and the honor that you deserve, it's not because you don't deserve it. It's not because you're not good enough. It's because they've got their own stuff going on that hasn't been healed, and they're just projecting it all onto you, right? Because if they were completely healed and whole and happy and joyful, what's going to come out of them? The same.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Sherry, do you have questions about anything else for Marissa?
Well, I'm just, one of the things that is such a priority for me is, dealing with that stuff in the moment when it shows up and somebody is attacking you. Let's say, somebody's attacking you in the moment and they're screaming or yelling at you and saying all these things to you. And yes, you realize it's their stuff. How can, some of our listeners respond and be more mindful of dealing with that in the moment?
No, that's a great question, because you don't need to stand and be subjected to that because it's abusive, right? It's verbal abuse and emotional abuse. So you can, in that moment, no matter who it is, and it's not easy with a family member, but this is about standing in your power and speaking your truth. You can say, look, I can tell that you're really angry right now. And that's okay. Like, it's okay to be angry. Feelings are okay. It's not about making feelings wrong. So you can say, I can tell that you're really angry right now, and that's okay, but it's not okay for you to keep yelling at me. So you need to either stop yelling, or I'm leaving, or I'm hanging up the phone, or whatever it is. That's taking a stand. And to do that, even if it's in the middle of a family gathering, it could be Christmas. Are you willing to take that stand for yourself? It's not easy. I did that a couple years ago in a restaurant for my mother's 85th birthday, I think it was. It was not easy, but I took a stand with a family member that I was not appreciating the way I was being spoken to. And I literally stood up in the restaurant. I mean, the meal was over, but even if it wasn't, I still would have left. And I said, you know what? I do not appreciate the way you're speaking with me. This is not okay. And I am not going to make a scene in the restaurant because she was getting loud. I said, so I'm sorry, Mom, I'm leaving. Now, keep in mind, I live out of the country.
I know.
I go back to Canada just for a few weeks every year. And I left, and I wasn't staying at my mom's, but I was staying with an aunt because my sister was staying with my mom. And I did not go back to her apartment afterwards for the cake and whatever. And that was the first time I took a real stand with a particular family member that I'd been challenged with for many, many years. And I thought, that's it. Now, what I realized, though, was I still had a lot of wounds from the past with this particular member of my family. And I thought, okay, I could make it about her, but I'm the one that got triggered because of, all of this. So I thought, I need to do some more inner work. But I also knew that in order to do that, I need to distance myself from her. So I sent a message and I said, you know what? I need to do some more healing work. I have some more healing to be done between my relationship with you. I took responsibility. I didn't make it about her. And I said, and in order for me to do that, I need to have no contact with you until I'm ready.
Yeah.
And I was not in contact for 6 months. Wow. And to make matters even tougher, this sibling had been diagnosed with cancer that summer. Wow. And so, it was a huge thing because people are saying, well, if somebody's dying or whatever, now, thank God she's doing great. But I took that risk that I didn't know what was going to happen with her. But I thought, no, I need to take a stand. I need to practice what I teach on a deeper level because I've done it many times in the past in other relationships, but this was kind of the last one. But having said all that, after the 6 months, we now have an amazing relationship. But it wouldn't have been like that if I didn't say enough. This is not okay.
So how did your other family that was there, how did they handle that situation? Because I feel like that would then create some conflict maybe with some others.
It could, yeah. My mom, she understood because she understood the dynamics that have been going on between my sister and I for many, many years. And she loves us both. And it's not that I don't love this sister. She's an amazing, amazing human being. She just had this way of projecting stuff onto me that didn't feel good. And I had said enough. I have a younger sibling who, she understood too, because they know the dynamic. People in the family know the dynamics between the different members, right? However, she was, asking me, are you sure about this? I mean, what if, she dies, like before you're in touch with her again? Like, how are you going to feel about that? But you know what? I was at peace with that decision because I thought, I did it in a loving way. I didn't lash out at her, yell and scream at her. And I didn't give back what she was dishing out to me. I basically, from a loving, heartfelt space, I said, this is not okay. I will not stand here and be spoken to the way you're speaking to me. No more. And so it was not easy. It was not easy. It was incredibly tough. It was one of the toughest stands I've ever taken, but it was also very liberating. And I did the work, though. I didn't just not talk to her and go about my merry way. I spent 6 months really going through some more of my own inner healing and letting go and releasing and letting go and dealing with what I make everything I teach, basically. And then we reached that point where I was able to go back and say, okay, I'm ready to communicate with you again.
God, what a great example.
I know.
I love, I'm always a person that says, I'm kinesthetic and visual. So I need examples to be able to, inwardly, work with what's going on. It's interesting what you just shared, because that's exactly what happened to me. My own daughter had cancer.
Oh, wow.
And, when I went through my near-death experience, I ended up walking homeless on the streets with my children.
Wow.
And it was a very difficult time. And during that time, I made the decision to let my daughter go live with her grandparents and her father. It was one of the toughest decisions I ever made. But what happened is she decided she wanted to stay, and she developed all these stories of resentment and anger. And of course, the family members contributed.
Sure.
I like to say, we're making it all up.
Yeah, we are.
And so they contributed to, that story. And so as she got older, the way she talked to me was through disrespect, complete disrespect. And so when she got cancer, all that old stuff came up, anger and resentment and hate, and how could I do what I did?
Right. All about you.
Yeah. And, so much, and not getting, because there's still some emotion there for me.
Absolutely. It's layers, right? The healing is in layers.
Yeah. And I had to forgive myself. I mean,
yes.
It was tough. But what I did was recognize what you just said is that I am worthy and I am valuable.
Yes,
and I don't deserve to be spoken to or treated like that, because I did the best that I could.
Absolutely. And that's important what you just said. And that's something I say, I have it on my manifesto in my Facebook group. Everyone is doing the best that they can. And not everyone likes to accept that, because they're like, oh, how could they? They're being cruel. And that's the best they can do in that moment, because of their own unhealed wounds, their own lack of tools, their own lack of awareness. They are doing the best they can.
Right.
They would do better if they could. Who wants to go around feeling miserable?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good.
And I've learned, just like we were talking about earlier, to talk to myself, to ask myself, what is that's coming up in me?
Right.
What am I still attached to?
Yes.
Whether it be guilt or sadness
around
that. And then I start talking to myself in a loving way.
Excellent.
You are worthy. You are loving. You've forgiven yourself.
Yes.
For that. And then I ask myself, what is it I really want? What I really want is an amazing relationship full of love and kindness and respect.
Yes.
And that brings up those emotions to a higher place of feeling good, rather than minutes earlier when I was a little bit tearful around.
But that's okay. It's okay. It's important to honor the feelings, and it's not about stuffing them down. So the important thing that I like to share with people is let the feelings come up, experience them deeply if it's deep pain, and just don't hold on to them forever, because that's where the pain just, it doesn't go away and it just keeps repeating itself. So it's let yourself feel it deeply, but then release it so that it doesn't hold on to you and you don't hold on to it. You don't carry it, like you're saying, day after day for the rest of your life. Right?
Right. So, Marissa, what do you want to share with us in closing today? I know you have an amazing gift that you want to share with our listeners, and tell them more about, where they can find out more about you and what you're offering.
Sure. Well, they can go to my website. I can see you've posted it there, magnifyyourmagnificence.com. And you will see that there's an opportunity there to request a free gift. I created a guide. It's actually a Create Healthy Boundaries guide. And based on what I could tell people really needed help with was the wording, like you were saying, how do you say things to family members? So there's like 7 different scenarios, family scenarios in there, with some scripts that you can use as a guide, because obviously you want to reword it to the way you speak. But it gives you an idea of how you can say no to different family situations, difficult conversations, in a more loving and respectful way. And so that's something people can request. And also, if they're interested in joining my free Facebook community, it's also called Magnify Your Magnificence. So they can just look for that on Facebook and join us. So it's a wonderful community. We're getting a lot of engagement, and I'll be starting to hopefully do more lives in there. That's been one on my list of things to do for this year. So I'm looking forward to connecting with some of your listeners. And if they want to just talk with me, if they feel like they want to explore whether or not they'd like to work with me privately or in a group program, they can just go to talkwithmarisa.com, and they'll be sent to my online calendar, and they can book a complimentary call with me.
Oh gosh, thank you. Misty, is there anything you want to say on with?
Well, I just signed up on your page a few days ago, and I've been getting your emails, and I've really liked what you're putting out there. So I definitely recommend everyone to go download this information and get your free guide. It's really great.
Excellent. I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Well, we're really grateful for you being on the show today. And we're also really grateful for you being in the Expanded Women Business Network. I mean, it's just been awesome. All these amazing women showing up, sharing our magnificence. So we want to thank you very much for being a guest on our show today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, until next week, go ahead and sign up for being a guest on our show if you'd like to be a guest. Until then, thank you all very much for listening in or watching the replay. Please share this out on all of your Facebook pages, your business groups. We really want to get our Expanded Women podcast going. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great
day. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.